What is up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today, we are going to be talking through my 2025 wide receiver rankings. I do want to stress my. Kevin will probably have some different opinions on some of these guys, but today we're going to be looking at my NFL draft grades as well as some scouting reports for my top 20 wide receivers. So make sure you stick with us through the intro. All right, before we get too deep into this, I do want to talk about the methodology here. So this is not a draft pick projection. I think some of these guys could go a little bit earlier. I think some of these guys could go a little bit later as well in the draft. But this is just a raw talent evaluation. There is some adjustment for wide receivers and the premium that the NFL puts on that position just to kind of fix up my big board. But it's mostly just a raw talent evaluation. It's a very minuscule adjustment. These are also not final grades. There's probably one or two players maybe that might go back to school, maybe even three. So this list could change if those guys go back to school. Also, we have the NFL scouting combine. We have bowl games coming up. We have the Senior Bowl, the Shrine Bowl, and All-Star games of that nature too. So things can change a little bit. There will be some adjustment as we get closer to the NFL draft. This is where we're landing right now for folks who want to get a little bit of a head start on looking at this wide receiver class. And let's get right into it. So number 20, Pat Bryant, the Illinois wide receiver. I have him graded as an NFL backup. 64.32 is the grade. 6'3", 200, had a pretty good season. 984 yards, 10 touchdowns. It was his best season thus far. He's listed at 200. I don't know if that's accurate. He's a pretty thin kid. I think he's a little bit lanky and a little bit wiry. So I don't necessarily see a whole lot of play strength behind him. There are times where it flashes for sure, but I think one thing that's really helping him is his production grade because he did have a good one. He's pretty good at high pointing the football. I think he's okay at catching the ball in traffic, but really he has really good hands, and I think he's a reliable option. Could be an NFL third down target where he can be a chain mover. I think that's a viable option for him. I don't see the high level potential that maybe some do with him. I do know he's an NFL draft community favorite right now, but I think he's a good player. I think there's a team's going to take him probably on day 3 and be pretty happy with his contributions to the team. Number 19 is LeJohntay Wester from Colorado, an NFL backup once again, 64.82. 5'11", 167 is what he has listed at. So size is definitely a concern, but what Wester has is just a ton of speed. He has game-breaking speed that I think is going to really help a team on special teams more than I think as a wide receiver. And these grades are just raw NFL draft grades. Once again, this isn't a look at fantasy football contributions. I think LeJohntay Wester is very much so going to be a better football player than a better fantasy football asset. But if an NFL team gets kind of creative with how they use him, get him the ball in space, he makes plays after the catch. I think that's one thing that he definitely does really well. And he can stretch the field vertically. He is quite small. I think a physical corner might give him trouble, but he's got enough speed to at least threaten the third level of the field to where you kind of have to consider that. So I think NFL teams are going to be pretty in on Wester. Number 18 is Elic Iomaner. I have him graded as an NFL backup, 65.83. He is probably the favorite among the NFL draft analysts nationally. The big name guys really like him. I have never really seen it, especially the last couple of years. I think last year there was a lot of promise as far as he's a traits-based projection where he's a big kid, 6'2", 210. He's a good athlete, but I think he got worse this year. If you watch the film, I think he got worse in contested catch situations. I think he dropped more footballs this year. I don't really see a whole lot of wiggle or ability to get open. And then if you're not winning the contested catch situations, I just don't know how that's a viable option for an NFL team. I feel like there are a lot of receivers that can get open and catch the football. I don't think he's one of them. I do think that this is an area that he's landing because he is still a projection. I think you can project that he'll develop if you get him with a good wide receiver coach. I think that you might be able to get something out of him, but I don't see it. I know I'll be one of the low men on him and this next guy, Xavier Restrepo. I do have a potential NFL starter grade on him, 66.33. As you can see on the grading scale from before, that's kind of the cutoff for the potential NFL starter. So that's where I look at kind of day two guys or guys that could rival or push into day two. Xavier Restrepo is in that potential NFL starter realm, but I think he's kind of a limited player. I think he's a really good college player, and I think he does a lot of things really well, but he's not a very good athlete, I don't think. He's listed 5'10", 198, but there are some guys listed at 180 that might play a little bit stronger than him. I think he's a fine slot wide receiver option, especially in that short to intermediate range. I just don't see a whole lot of athleticism from him. I think he's got reliable hands. I don't know if he dropped a ball this year. I'm looking at it now. He dropped 2 balls this year. So, just really, really good hands. I think he can be a reliable chain moving type of option, but I don't see him as anything more than a wide receiver 3 or 4. And so while I have that potential NFL starter grade on him, he's still going to be that third option in a wide receiver room, in my opinion. Now, once again, I know that I'll be lower on him than others. I think he's a fine route runner. I think he can get some separation, which is why I would have him over a guy like Io Manor. But I do think that the physical limitations are something that people probably need to be discussing a little bit more with him. He's been a very elite producer. It doesn't matter who the quarterback's been. He really shined with Cam Ward this year, and he had a really good season. And so he has a good production grade in my scale as well. But I just see a little bit of concern as far as the athleticism goes. So he's down here instead of up in that like top 10 range, which is where he kind of is for everyone. And then number 16 on this list is Ricky White from UNLV. Once again, potential NFL starter grade on him. He's listed at 6'1", 190, but he's a kid that 2 years, so 2023, 1,487 yards, 8 touchdowns, over 1,000 yards again this year, 11 touchdowns. But the first portion of this season, he just really wasn't getting the football as much as he should have been. He only had 6 targets in each of his first 2 games. And then it really kind of turned on after that. 9 targets, 11 targets, 11 targets. And really the lowest he got after that week 3 game was 7 targets against Boise State. So this was a kid who I think has elite borderline elite contributions after the catch. I think he can really make things happen after the catch. I think he's a really good contested catcher. I think he's a little more physical than you would guess at his size and weight, but he is one of the best ball trackers in this class. I think if you line him up, you say you're our Z wide receiver and you're going to go deep, 80% of the time, I think Ricky White is a fine option for that. And I think he's a pretty high reward type of option as well. He's a little bit older, so that might knock him on NFL teams' radars. But I think this is a really talented player that does get really good separation as well. He's not the best route runner in the world, but he tends to be open, which is an important trait to have. So I like Ricky White. I think he has a lot of upside as one of those like field stretching type of players. 15 through 11, Torrey Horton from Colorado State. 14 is Ja'Cory Brooks from Louisville. 13 is Evan Stewart. I'm sad about this one. I've been a huge Evan Stewart advocate, but the film isn't quite there. But he's from Oregon. 12, Jack Besh from TCU. And 11, Isaiah Bond. Sad about that one as well. Been high on 2 of these players. And even Ja'Cory Brooks actually over the years, creating Devy content and things like that. But let's start with Torrey Horton, potential NFL starter grade 70.85 out of Colorado State, 6'3", 185. Missed a lot of this season. He only played in 5 games this year. When he did play, he was inconsistent, I guess, to start. He really started to turn it on right before the injury, though. But he had back-to-back 1,000-yard seasons, 2022 and 2023. He was a guy that was just getting you a ton of yards after the catch. This Colorado State passing attack was really not anything to write home about. In fact, it was actually pretty bad. But what they would do is they would throw him a ton of screen passes and say, hey, Torrey, go get us some yards. And that's exactly what he did. He had over a 2.7 yards per route run in each of his last 3 years. So for analytics folks, I think they're really gonna like what they see as far as that goes. I think they're gonna knock him for his age. He is an older prospect, but he is a very, very good yards after the catch player. In 2020 even, he had over 8 yards after the catch per reception. This year, it wasn't as much. I think part of that was the inconsistent play leading right into that injury. But last year, 6 yards after the catch, he definitely can make things happen. I am a little bit concerned about his ability to separate downfield because we didn't see a whole lot of it, but I think you can get creative with him, and I think there might be some of that in there. There's signs that he can separate down the field. It's just not all there yet. We'll see what an NFL team does with him, but I'm intrigued at least. I think he's a higher upside play than some of those guys in that 20 to 16 range. Number 14, Ja'Cory Brooks, out of Louisville. Good transfer over to Louisville, but smart to move on and go there. 71.36 potential NFL starter here. A really good year, over 1,000 yards, 9 touchdowns, was really Louisville's saving grace in that passing attack. I think when they lost Colin Lacey, who I really like as well, when they lost him for a majority of the season, I think a lot of folks were looking like, where are they going to get this production? Lacey was going to be a nice little acquisition for them, and he's going back to school. But Brooks, I believe, is out of eligibility because he didn't use a red shirt in any of his years, despite not really being used at Alabama, especially in 2023. So Brooks will be entering the draft. I think one thing with Brooks is I mean, he was a very, very highly coveted recruit, and you see a lot of that athleticism out there. I have him a projected relative athletic score of 8 and change, so a little bit over that. I think he's a pretty good route runner. I'm a little concerned about his actual height and weight. I have him listed at 6'1" and 5/8, I think is where we're at, and then 190. But I just don't know if I see a 190-pound player out there. I do think he's a really good route runner. I think his hands are kind of problematic, and I think that's probably part of the reason why Alabama didn't use him. He drops quite a few footballs. Interestingly enough, though, he's pretty good at catching the ball in traffic. It's when he's open, he tends to drop the football. I think he's a good yards after the catch player. I think you can get pretty creative with him as an option on an NFL offense. But the physicality aspect, he doesn't play big. He doesn't play like he's 190, and I'm curious to see if maybe we learn that he's more like 175 or 180, somewhere in there, and maybe that's what he's been playing at. Because it just he can get pushed off his routes pretty easily, and that's kind of concerning. So that's why he's down here and maybe not a little bit higher. I know some folks do like him quite a bit, so we'll see as this process continues if I come off of that take that he might not be physical enough to go against NFL corners, but that's kind of where I'm landing here. 13, Evan Stewart, potential NFL starter grade 71.36 out of Oregon. This is a disappointing one. I think there were flashes of really, really good play at times from Evan Stewart this year. The Ohio State game really comes to mind. This evaluation is not done. Oregon has at least one more game against that same Ohio State team. But Stewart's one where you watch the film and you're like, it's okay. Like it's not where it should be at this point after being such a highly touted recruit. It seems to be some disinterest there, and there was at Texas A&M as well. But when you watch the film, you're like, man, why is Oregon not throwing him the ball more? It's probably because they're just kind of scheming around him being a decoy, and it kind of seems like that. I think he's still a really good route runner. I think he can generate a ton of separation when he's locked in, but I think the problem is he's not always locked in, and so I have to knock him for that. I've tried to make excuses for him, to be completely honest, throughout his entire career, and I'm just kind of to the point where I don't know if he has the desire to be great, and so he's down here at 13. I had him up at wide receiver 2 or 3 or something like that heading into the year because I was betting on that potential. We just haven't seen that potential just yet. So Evan Stewart, sorry, buddy. I think he could prove me wrong very, very easily. I think he's incredibly talented. So I hope to see it, but we'll see. He's got some games coming up. Number 12, Jack Besh from TCU, potential NFL starter, 71.86 grade. He's a kid that has really flashed since. So he came in as a recruit. I think he was listed actually as a tight end recruit, and he never. He's only 6'2", first of all, so he would have been a small tight end. But now he's down 6'2", 215 is what he's listed at. 4 years. He was at LSU for 2 years. His freshman year, he was really productive. 489 yards, 3 touchdowns. Used kind of as a move tight end. So there was the option to play tight end. He transferred to TCU last year. He kind of just learned how to play the wide receiver position more intently. And then this year, he really had that breakout year: 1,034 yards, 9 touchdowns, and some of the most sure hands that I've seen in this class. He has 2 total drops over the last 2 years and 4 total drops over the course of his 4-year career. Really, really sound football player. I think that there's some good athleticism with him. I think he's a fine athlete. I don't think he's elite at anything, to be honest. I think he runs pretty good routes outside of his hands. I'll give him elite hands for sure. If you only have 4 drops in 4 years, that counts as elite. But outside of that, I just don't see an elite trait with him. But I think he's probably going to be an NFL starter that contributes to a winning football team because of the nature of what he does best, which is he can get open fairly well, despite maybe being just a good athlete, maybe not a great athlete, and he catches the football, and he catches the football in traffic quite well. I think that's an important piece. So Jack Bech, good football player, and we're getting into the range of good football players, which is good. I didn't talk about it at the beginning of the video, but my general consensus is that this is one of the worst wide receiver classes that I've seen in quite a while. I'm pretty low on this wide receiver class, but we're starting to get into that area of guys I'm really, really intrigued by. So number 11, Isaiah Bond. This one, I think he could go back to school because of the lack of productivity. But Isaiah Bond and Evan Stewart have a lot in common to me. So potential NFL starter, 72.56 out of Texas. He is an elite athlete with elite speed that I think has unlimited potential if he locks in. I think his releases and route running have been good. I think that as far as hands go and like mental mistakes go, I'm a little bit concerned about the film. I think catching in traffic is not his forte. It should be his forte. A lot of folks have compared him to Jalen Waddle, but Jalen Waddle was a dominant football player at one point in college. We have not yet seen that from Isaiah Bond. He's elite after the catch, and if a team gets creative with him, they can make a ton happen. However, if I'm looking at a starting wide receiver, I don't want to need to be creative. I would like to just have a wide receiver that can go out, get open, be locked in, and be a contributor to my football team. I'm not sure I see that yet with Isaiah Bond. I hope that he turns it on here as the playoffs continue and then declares, and teams are still intrigued by that elite athleticism and that elite speed. But as of right now, I think I'd be comfortable saying this has been a disappointing year, and I kind of if he doesn't turn it on as the playoffs continue, hopefully he gets healthy and he's able to get out there. But if he doesn't turn it on, I think Isaiah Bond should go back to school and put some better stuff on film because it hasn't really been all that good this year. Number 10 through 6. So 10, Savion Williams from TCU as well. 9, Jalen Royals from Utah State. 8, Jeremy Bernard from Alabama. 7, Jaden Higgins from Iowa State. And 6, Jalen Noel. My apologies. Jalen Noel from Iowa State as well. So I've got the duo back to back here in the rankings. Savion Williams, let's start with him. Potential NFL starter with him, 72.66, 6'5, 225. Inconsistent player, and that's probably contributed to his lack of elite production. This year was pretty good, 611 yards, 6 touchdowns. Last year, 573 and 4 touchdowns. This is an offense at TCU that likes to spread the football around, but Jack Bech was able to be productive. So there's a piece of it where I think part of that is on Savion Williams. One thing that could contribute to that is his lack of reliability. The hands are certainly concerning. I think there will be times when he just drops the ball wide open in space. It reminds me, not to helmet scout, but there's some Quentin Johnston to him. I think he's an elite athlete. I think we're going to see him do some crazy, crazy stuff at the combine. Rumor has it he's jumping out the gym, which is going to be good. He's in kind of shifty player for a guy his size, and that's what intrigues me so much. I think when you have an elite athlete that can be shifty and has a little bit of wiggle, then there is a lot of upside there. That said, I would like to see more consistency. I think he's still got some room to grow as a separator, but also just as a guy that you can rely on to throw him the football. I'm a little bit concerned about that. But if you get, once again, another player where if you get creative with him and you start doing pop pass stuff, you throw him screens that he catches and is able to just get upfield, he is a very, very good yards after the catch player. I think he kind of carries the ball like a running back. Can be a bad thing at times, especially at the wide receiver position. We've seen guys that work out that have this type of build. We've seen Laviska Shenault. And so I think he's somewhere in between where it could go either way. And I'm kind of ranking him conservatively because I do think the upside with him is it far exceeds a number 10 ranking in this class specifically. Jalen Royals, number 9, potential NFL starter, 72.86 out of Utah State, 5'11", 193, I believe is what he's listed at. Good route runner, good yards after the catch player once again. He's just a little bit smaller. Reliable hands. I think he really attacks the football in the proper ways. I think, when I say that, a lot of folks like to body catch or they do like the clapping technique. Royals has very natural hands. He looks like a wide receiver. That's an important, it sounds a little crazy, but it's a very important piece when you're evaluating wide receivers because that means that they're natural and they can work at other things instead of just catching the football. Royals doesn't have any problems with catching the football. I think he catches the ball in traffic quite well for a player his size. I think he high points the ball quite well for a player his size, and I think he's a pretty good athlete as well. But really, it's the yards after the catch ability. I think you're going to line Jalen Royals up probably in the slot. You're going to throw him some screens. You're going to let him get open underneath, and that's going to be the type of player that he is. I think he's going to have a really good pre-draft process as we get into the bowls, the all-star games, and things like that. I think Royals is a good player. 8, Jeremy Bernard. This one, I guess, is a hot take, maybe because most people don't expect Jeremy Bernard to declare after what I would call an up and down season. But 6'1", 203. I think he's been fairly effective for the circumstances. I think Alabama's quarterback situation, I like Jalen Milroe. I'm still willing to bet on Jalen Milroe. Jalen Milroe absolutely should go back to school and kind of figure out some of the problems that he has as a passer. But Jeremy Bernard still 714 yards, 2 touchdowns, had a Pro Football Focus grade of 78.8, yards per route run over 2.27, and only 2 drops on the year. He only has 3 drops total. So super reliable hands. He reminds me a bit of his former teammate, actually, Jalen Polk, where I think he's just an underrated player that maybe if he declares, he could work into day 2 range because of the lack of depth at this wide receiver class. But I just think if he goes back to school, I think we're going to be talking about him as one of those top 2026 NFL draft wide receivers once he puts it all together. I think he's still developmental. I think I'd rather bet on him being a number 2 wide receiver than some of these guys even being a number 3 wide receiver. So Bernard is up there for me. I know that's a little off consensus for sure. Number 7, Jaden Higgins. Once again, another thing that's a little off of consensus is having Higgins below Jalen Noel. But man, when I watch Noel, he's incredible. Higgins is also he has been incredible for really 3 straight years. 1,185 yards and 9 touchdowns at a 90.5 PFF receiving grade this year. He had a 2.66 yards per route run, 3 last year. Another sure-handed guy. When you watch Jaden Higgins, so 6'4", 215, really good build. I think part of my concern was that he was always just going to be a contested catch type of player. I think last year the film would suggest that he wasn't the greatest separator in the world. A lot of his contested catch opportunities were because he didn't get open enough. This year he had more contested catch opportunities, but I do feel more confident that he's able to actually generate separation. I think he plays the wide receiver position. He can be a true Z, true X. I think you can play him at both positions. I think he can beat press coverage. I think that there's a really good set of skills here. Well, I don't necessarily think there's an elite set of skills outside of the hands, which I think are really awesome. And I think an NFL team is going to value that a lot. I just don't see any super elite traits. I think he's generally not that physical for a guy his size, but Ironically, I think that gives him a little bit more wiggle. I think he's able to separate a little bit better than he was last year. So he has kind of vaulted up my rankings over the last year and a half or so. So I'm excited to see what he's able to do once he gets to the NFL level. We're into the NFL starter grades, which only having 6 plus of those, or just 6, of NFL starter or better is not good. It's not good. That's why I'm lower on this class. But Jalen Knoll, number 6 wide receiver, NFL starter, 74.07. This kid has one of the most explosive releases in the class. It might actually, I think it is the best among all prospects in this class. I've never seen a kid line up in the slot and take his releases like he's lining up at X. I think that's the main thing with him. He is incredibly explosive immediately. And I think that has been a reason why over the last 2 years he's been as productive as Higgins. 10 or 1,076 yards, 7 touchdowns. He had 7 touchdowns last year, 820 yards. His yards per route run clip this year was actually right in that same range as Jaden Higgins, 2.54. He has more drops. I think Higgins certainly has more reliable hands, but the explosiveness, the ability to generate separation wherever he is on the field. He's probably going to be a slot wide receiver. I think there's a chance that you can line him up at Z. He reminds me a bit of Josh Downs in that he's just always going to be open, and he has reliable hands in contested catch situations despite being a smaller type of kid. So I think he's awesome after the catch. I think that the ball tracking is really, really good for a player his size. Noel, to me, is going to be one of those guys that you get him at the Senior Bowl, and man, oh man, is he going to be a favorite of everyone's. I think there's a chance that you're going to see him in first round NFL mock drafts once we get to the Senior Bowl. So um, I think he's a better athlete than Higgins, and I think that there is a very high potential for Jalen Noel at the NFL level. So excited to see it. I know Kevin is in on this. He really liked Jalen Noel, even when he was a recruit, I think. So Kevin will be in on this too. So this is one where I think you're going to start to see this more and more as we get through draft season. All right, my top 5 here. Tez Johnson from Oregon. Number 4 is Tre Harris from Ole Miss. 3 is Luther Burden from Missouri. 2 is Emeka Egbuka from Ohio State. And number 1 is Tetairoa McMillan from Arizona. Let's start with 5. Tez Johnson, NFL starter grade 74.37. He's a kid that is listed at 165, which could be a problem. I think NFL teams are going to look at that size and be pretty concerned about it. This year, the production still there, but a little bit lesser. I think 866 yards, 10 touchdowns. Last year, he had 1182 and 10 touchdowns. He was working with a first round quarterback for what it's worth last year. And Dylan Gabriel is not a first round quarterback. In fact, I don't think he's a day 2 quarterback. And Tez's production really didn't come down. And a lot of people were concerned with Evan Stewart coming in that Tez Johnson wouldn't be used as much or as frequently. And he has commanded those targets. He's been productive. He's had over 700 yards at least for the last 4 years. He's been an incredibly productive player despite being really, really small. He's a small kid, listed 5'10", 165, like I said. He is the most elite separator in this class. I think bar none. I don't see anyone that can generate separation like him out in space, whether it's vertically, whether it's on the underneath stuff. I think Tez Johnson is incredible at just using his leverage, understanding leverage enough to just generate yards and yards of separation. I'll bet as we get into some like advanced analytics, I'll bet Tez Johnson's going to have separation scores that break the model. He reminds me a lot of Tank Dell. Hopefully Tank Dell is going to be okay and have a good long NFL career. I think maybe some of the concern for Tez Johnson could come from Tank Dell's 2 major injuries over the last 2 years with how skinny he is. That said, Tank Dell has been very, very productive at the NFL level when he's been healthy. Tez Johnson, to me, is the exact same player. In fact, I think I like Tez Johnson more than I like Tank Dell that year. So I just think this is a kid that's getting underrated, mostly because of his size. I think a lot of people get scared off of Oregon wide receivers in general because Troy Franklin, everyone was super high on him, including us here at the Devy Royale, and it just didn't pan out as far as NFL draft capital goes. But I think Tez Johnson has a chance to be a day two pick to a team that really needs a good separating slot wide receiver, and that's exactly what I see Tez Johnson as. Number 4, Tre Harris, NFL starter grade 75.38 from Ole Miss. 5 years in college. Started at Louisiana Tech. His final year at Louisiana Tech, 925 yards and 10 touchdowns. And then just got better as he went to Ole Miss and never really lost a step. 1,030 yards this year, 7 touchdowns. He only played in 8 games this year and still did that. He was incredibly dominant when he was out there as far as production goes. 89.7 receiving grade. This was his best year as far as Pro Football Focus grading goes. He had a yards per route run clip of 5.15. The analytics people in the world, shout out Jay Stein, they like that number. Anything really over 3 is like really, really good. Anything over 5 is kind of unheard of. Tre Harris to me is one of those guys where you just bet on the athleticism taking him as far as he can go. I think he's a great, great athlete. I think he's got a really good release. I think he can beat press coverage very easily. The routes, a little more inconsistent. He's a big kid. He is only listed at 210, 6'3", 210. I think 210 might be selling it, or overselling it, but I think he plays big. He's a very good contested catch getter. This last year, he caught 4 out of his 9 contested catches, but the fact that there were only 9 contested catches means that he was getting open enough. So I've been really pleased with what I've seen from Tre Harris. I don't necessarily know if that's going to translate to fantasy football success. I think he might be a better NFL player than a fantasy football asset. That being said, I just think he's a good football player. I know that's putting it simply, but he is a good football player that he blocks his ass off out there. I really like what I saw from Tre Harris this year. So he's here at number 4, even if, in most classes, he'd probably be down at like 12 for what it's worth. But here we are. This is what this wide receiver class is. We're taking what we're given, and that's where Tre Harris is landing. Number 3, Luther Burden, quality NFL starter grade 78.89. Many folks have heard us talk about Luther Burden on this channel, and if you haven't, you should go check out some of our other videos. But kid out of Missouri, 5'11", 208, has a bit of a Deebo Samuel type game to him. There were times where we still saw some Jamar Chase-like upside to Luther Burden. I think some of that this year, we talked about it on the Quarters podcast, which you can find on this channel as well. But there's been some disinterest from Luther Burden, it seems, this year. And quite frankly, the Missouri offense took a massive step back this year. I think Brady Cook took a massive step backwards this year. He went from 1,209 yards and 9 touchdowns and a 91.0 PFF receiving grade this year to 676 yards, 6 touchdowns, and an 80.3. So the drop off is real. And what I want to caution folks, it's not all Brady Cook and it's not all Missouri with Luther Burden's downfall, I guess, this year. He was in the slot a little bit more. A lot of folks box Emeka Egbuka into being just a slot wide receiver. Luther Burden is more of that to me. And I think he can win from the outside, but I think your best play is going to come from the slot. So I think if Luther Burden is drafted super, super high, I might be a little bit shocked. I think he's going to do really well in the testing aspect of things, but when you look at some of the film, it's just inconsistent. Some of the routes are a little round. I think he rounds his routes pretty often. I think there are times where he's just running a route, going through the motions, and that can be problematic. I think he's going to have to answer to NFL teams for that this year. That said, the upside is incredible. This kid is so dynamic after the catch. I think when he's on, he can win at all 3 levels. I think he can take a simple slant to the house, and that is a quality that not every prospect in this class has. So while I just knocked the kid for 2 minutes straight, I still think that the upside is immense, which is why he's still up here at number 3, whereas a guy like Isaiah Bond or Evan Stewart has fallen off significantly. Luther Burden has fallen from my wide receiver 2 over the summer to my wide receiver 3 because the upside is just incredible. He's going to be a kid that he's going to get a lot of targets. I think either way, you're going to work him into your game plan. So if he gets a lot of targets, I think fantasy football folks are going to want Luther Burden on their team next year. Emeka Egbuka, number 2, quality NFL starter, 79.9. from Ohio State. I'm recording this after watching. I was actually at the college football playoff, got to watch Emeka Egbuka live, and let me tell you, he's a good player. His teammate Jeremiah Smith, though, we'll talk about him in a couple of years when we're doing NFL draft videos. But man, oh man, is that kid different? But Egbuka was open pretty much all night, and that was pretty clear from my seats. And it's been pretty clear on his film really for the last 2 to 3 years. Last year was a little bit inconsistent. I don't think he was necessarily ever super healthy last year, but this year he turned it back on. 824 yards, 9 touchdowns this year, while playing kind of a secondary role at times to Jeremiah Smith. But Ibuka is one of these guys. Once again, you throw him in the slot. I think he's a power slot. He's a kid that is gonna be productive wherever you put him. One of my main gripes with Ibuka for the last really after his sophomore year going into his junior year, this was his senior year. Uh, One of my main gripes was that he was winning on athleticism alone, and the routes just were not precise. That's gone. And I think he's one of the better route runners in this class. I think you get him the ball and let him run with it, and that's a winning recipe. A lot of folks see Amon-Ra St. Brown with him. I see that as well, but I think the upside is I mean, I wouldn't say the upside is higher than what Amon-Ra St. Brown has done at the NFL level, but I think the upside is higher than what we all perceived Amon-Ra St. Brown's upside to be. So Ibuka is a really, really good player. I think he's going to be a first round top 20 pick probably when all is said and done. And then my number one, Tetairoa McMillan. He's been my number one since I evaluated him in the summer. He's been my number one, I think, for longer than that. But quality NFL starter, 82.91. For reference, that's a little bit worse than the top three last year, including Roma Dunze. But still a really good player. I think he gets Mike Evans comps, and I think that's justifiable. An elite athlete, I don't necessarily think he's the fastest player in the world, but it doesn't matter. Wide receivers don't always need to be blazers, and in fact, some of the time that's worse for them. So I think he's a good route runner for a kid his size. He's 6'5", 210 is what he's listed at. We'll see if that holds. I think he could be more like 6'4", 205, but he plays big, and that's all that really matters. All the 50-50 balls are really like 80-20 balls with Tetairoa McMillan. He reminds me of Mike Evans in that sense, but also he reminds me of a better Drake London. And Drake London was I think he was my wide receiver one in that class. I have Tetairoa McMillan ranked just ahead of him if I was just grading, looking at the raw grades. So he is an elite high pointer. I think his yards after the catch ability is something that gets undersold, but his ability to beat press coverage is actually pretty impressive. For a kid that didn't see it a whole lot, I think he has some nuance to his releases. I think his routes are pretty refined. And yeah, quite frankly, he is probably the best ball tracker in this class. Maybe up there. Ricky White's up there. I talked about him a few slides ago, but Tetairoa McMillan's right up there as one of the best ball trackers. So when you talk about all of the different skill sets, I think that he could be rivaling the best in almost everything. So really, really good football player that should go in the top 10, honestly, in this class, because it's a down class. We'll talk about the quarterbacks at some point on this channel, but it's a very down class. So Tetairoa McMillan, lock him in. I think he's going to be the first wide receiver off the board, and he is one of the better wide receivers that we've seen in the last couple of years. So maybe not the best. Like I said, he's probably in the top 5 over the last 3 years. So good wide receiver to add to your team. So that's it. That's my top 20. Some other guys that I watched. I watched the other 2 Colorado kids. I watched Jalen Lane, Andrew Armstrong, Kyron Lacey, Brew McCoy, the Tennessee guys I watched as well. So there's just guys that did not make my list here. So Kyron Lacey, probably the guy that is going to get the most hype. That I just don't see it with him. So Brew McCoy could make some noise in the All-Star circuit. Didn't have the best game against Ohio State, so we'll see how he rebounds from that. But That'll do it. Thank you guys for watching. As always, just make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you like these videos or like any of Kevin's videos, which I'm sure you like Kevin's videos more than mine, and that's totally fine. Just make sure you're subscribed. We put out a lot of content for you guys. If you're interested, you can join our Patreon, patreon.com/DevyRoyale, or just join us over on Substack. We do have premium articles that we write, and we're running a holiday special right now. So you get 40% off an annual subscription. You can check that out. The link is in the description here. Thank you guys for watching. We'll catch you on the next video.